Testing. Good morning, everyone. I'll invite you to take your seats, please, so we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Carissa Hobson, and as a member of the Paris Committee of Capacity Building, PCCB, I would like to welcome you all to the fourth day of the Capacity Building Hub here at COP28. The theme for today is Private Finance Capacities. At present, we confront the stark reality that despite managing substantial assets, only a fraction of the financial sector's resources are dedicated to climate-resilient investments. In addressing this challenge, Private Finance Capacities Day focuses on exploring experiences, good practices, and lessons learned to mobilize and upscale private climate finance. The key objectives include addressing capacity gaps, spotlighting collaborative efforts among private, public, and philanthropic institutions, promoting innovative financing models, and amplifying diverse perspectives on capacity building and climate finance access. Through capacity building, stakeholders gain a deeper understanding of climate finance mechanisms, improved risk management, aligned regulatory frameworks, and increased access to diverse funding opportunities. This empowers businesses to confidently explore innovative technologies and models, fostering a shift towards sustainability. But before we dive into the events of today, let me introduce you to the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, the PCCB. Established at COP21 in 2015, the PCCB seeks to address current and emerging gaps and needs in implementing and further enhancing capacity building in developing countries. To support the PCCB's mission and mandate, the committee launched the PCCB Network in 2020 as a voluntary association of interested stakeholders engaged in climate-related capacity building. The PCCB regularly mobilizes the expertise of its network members at the international level through the Capacity Building Hub. The Capacity Building Hub is a mandated event of the PCCB and takes place every year at COP, with this year as the fifth hub to take place. Its objective ultimately is to showcase the variety of capacity building efforts which have taken place over the year by sharing information, experiences, and technical capacities to further climate action on a larger scale. To learn more about the PCCB and its network, make sure to check out the two banners to my left is this way, with QR codes which give you more information. I'm pleased to announce that we have an exciting lineup of sessions, starting with the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. Following this, Amnesty University Dubai will guide us in quantifying ESG factors in socially responsible. We'll then deep dive into the significant role of commercial banks in mobilizing higher climate finance for a sustainable future. A collaborative effort from Sustainable Markets Initiative Financial Services Task Force, Barclays, HSBC, and Mangrove Breakthrough will focus on showcasing the power of collaboration in addressing biodiversity loss through transparent, nature-based solutions. The NDC partnership will shift the focus to efficient strategies for catalyzing private sector finance for NDC implementation. And finally, the World Bank will present strategies to increase awareness among infrastructure stakeholders for climate-smart public-private partnerships. All the sessions today are intricately connected to the cross-cutting issues and presented through employing various engaging modalities. As we delve into impact investing opportunities, a key focus emerges on fostering gender-inclusive and equitable financial practices. The discussions on quantifying environmental, social, and governance (ESG) factors not only contribute to responsible financial practices, but align with the principles of gender equality. Moreover, our commitment to an intergenerational dialogue actively involving the youth affirms our dedication to empower and engage them at decision-making level. Exploring the role of commercial banks in climate finance inherently brings forth considerations of human rights implications. The collaborative efforts addressing biodiversity loss showcase the power of partnerships while respecting indigenous perspectives given their close relationship with nature. In essence, these sessions collectively underscore our commitment to inclusivity and diverse perspectives within the realm of private climate finance. Now I'd like to invite Yoko Lu, a youth expert of the 5th Capacity Building Hub, to share some of her insights on how today's thematic day converges with the mainstreaming of youth voices. Yoko?
So hello everyone, so my name is Yoko. I'm here on behalf of a youth expert. So it's very important for people from developing countries to learn more about the private finance and the mechanism for all, the finance mechanism, and so that the youth from developed countries can also have a different south to south or global north to global south relationship. And it's also very important to have youth be engaged in private finance, especially where in the private financial world, there's also youth working in this sector. And also it's very important for the people who's not working in the non-finance sector to also learn the importance of private finance in climate. So for Article 2.1c of Paris Agreement, which is about the pathway towards low greenhouse emissions and climate resilience development, at both local level and international level. It's very important also for limiting the carbon dioxide emissions. And so it's also very important also to have, as it was mentioned before, to have a youth, women, local communities, indigenous peoples to come together to know about this topic. And also Article 2.1c is also in alignment with the Article 9, which is about the developed countries providing finance in both adaptation and mitigation. And then, so I think that's also very important for youth, as adaptation is it's really a big topic now, as we're looking for doubling the climate, doubling the adaptation finance as well. And then also there's a mitigation. It's also, unfortunately, it's not a negotiation topic this year. Mitigation is also still in consultation or in meetings where everyone can come together, and it's really beyond COP28. And also when it comes to investment and risk management, and we also really need to collaborate with multi-bilateral banks, financial institutions, and also the Global Climate Fund or Global Environmental Facility. And because for example, I have been to the JEF Assembly this year in Vancouver as a younger representative. It was really a unique way to encourage, to interact with the JEF, the Global Environment Facility. And we also had a bilateral meeting with them to really push forward, to include youth inclusion in their board, which does not exist at the moment. And then yes, it's also, of course, there's a fossil fuel industry. There's also we need to look at how the finance we can really provide that fossil fuel industry is also something that we really need to push forward to really really have the flow with the financial mechanism and really push for the renewable energies as well. And there's many things I want to say, but I think that's it for now. Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Yoko, and it's good to know. I like to think that I'm still a youth, so I'm going to claim that, and it's good to know that the youth are still so much involved and see themselves in this process. So I'd like to extend my gratitude to our lead partners, 1.5 and CPI, and now I give them the floor.
A very warm welcome to everyone joining us, both in person and virtually. I'm Chavi Meetle from Climate Policy Initiative, and it's an absolute pleasure to be co-hosting this with our amazing partners, 1.5. We stand at the intersection of necessity and opportunity, recognize the indispensable role that private actors play in our financial ecosystem. CPI recently published a report called The Global Landscape of Climate Finance, where we saw that private actors contribute almost 49% of the total climate finance that was tracked globally. So we're looking in the magnitude of something around $625 billion that they contributed out of the total 1.3 trillion that we were able to track. However, this really falls short of the required needs. We are looking at something in the range of $8 to $10 trillion between 2030 and 2050. So we need sort of a step up on financing. And then who's going to really be financing this, right? That's a real question. And several reports have suggested that, local actors going to be in the emerging economies will be the one that contributing to almost 50% of the estimated needs. We're looking at public actors, we're looking at private actors, and domestic capital markets. And for that, we need to ensure that we are able to leverage the concessional finance to expand private flows. We need to ensure the private sector is ready when the institutional reforms come in. And for that, we need capacity building in the private sector. We need to explore, and as we heard, amplify, diversify the experiences, the practices, and the lessons learned, promote innovative financing solutions, mechanisms, strategies, technologies, just to know what has worked and what has not worked, and actually more what has not worked, so we're not repeating the same mistakes and learning from each other. And it's critical that we work together so that we are all here, and this is exactly the reason we are all here today. And Capacity Hub is sort of critical in fostering that coordination among different stakeholders that are so critical to this entire ecosystem. And this will really help us ensure that the whole is bigger, better than the sum of its parts. With that, I'll really look forward to the session that's being planned here with all our amazing partners. And I would like then hand over to Kikashan Masu, she's the founder of Green Hope Foundation, to kick off the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shavi, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to share the space with all of you today to discuss this very, very important topic. As was mentioned, my name is Kehkasha, and I'm the president of Green Hope Foundation. And this topic is also very, very close to my heart because I'm currently an MBA candidate at Cornell University focusing on impact investing and environmental finance, so directly related to studies and research. And this topic, honestly, because there's that they're somehow separate from the society and the environment and somehow do not relate to people and planet at all. And now, obviously, this misconception is extremely untrue because sustainability has three pillars: the economy, society, and the environment. And none of them can function without the other. And you also cannot if you have an unstable society and an unhealthy environment. So for financial institutions within the private sector to remain relevant and stay afloat, there is an urgent need to make sure that they are a part of the solution. And from the side of the society and the environment, it's also really important to see how best we can work with financial institutions to ensure that we're able to really realign the way we look at our global financial system so that we're able to make sure that the money reaches where it's most needed, particularly in the communities, climate vulnerable communities suffering from loss and damage impacts, and make sure that our young generation, our young professionals coming in as well, are educated with the knowledge that impact investing is important, that it is lucrative to invest in climate solutions for people and planet, and just the basic understanding that it requires our economy, society, and environment to work and grow together in harmony. So I'm truly be the moderator for today's session. And I would first like to invite up to the stage to give the keynote capacity building in this regard to really accelerate the transition to sustainability and how you can enhance climate action around the world.
Thank you very much, Kishan, and congratulations for your achievements at such a short age. So you are an inspiration, and I hope you continue to do the work that you are doing, and that many of the young people everywhere will follow your steps. So good morning and a very, very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us in this session dedicated to one of the most critical tasks in our collective efforts to address the climate crisis, and one that is often not given the attention it deserves, and that is capacity building. So let me begin also by expressing my deep, deep gratitude to our friends from the Climate Policy Initiative, as well as to my colleagues from 1.5, and also to my colleagues and friends from the UNFCCC Secretariat for organizing this session. Thank you also to all the distinguished experts that will be sharing their hard-earned expertise and wisdom with us today. The issue that we are discussing today is at the heart of the transformation that the world needs to achieve if we are to stand any chance of success in addressing the climate crisis. The magnitude of the climate crisis is now beyond dispute. The science of climate, which has always been sound, has become more and more robust, accurate, and reliable over the past few years. Study after study from unimpeachable sources have confirmed critical findings about the human causes and the devastating consequences of climate change. At the same time, the international climate architecture, which is the UN Framework Convention, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, provide the best guidance and the best instruments to respond to the warnings coming from the scientific community. While it is true that there are many issues and many areas in the climate agenda where work remains to be done, by now the world may be said to have a sufficiently comprehensive and robust set of principles and guidelines to undertake ambitious and meaningful climate action. In short, we know what needs to be done. So what we need now is to act in a way that is consistent with the gravity of the climate emergency. The priority, given the clarity of the scientific evidence and the availability of a robust climate action framework, is to promote transformative change at the national and local level with the support of the private sector, civil society organizations, and the public at large. This is, in my view, the way we must frame our discussions here today. And capacity building, whether in the public or the private sector, is critical to our efforts because it is a precondition for change. It is not difficult to understand why this is the case. The change that needs to take place in every aspect of our economy must be carried out by people. And without a new set of skills and a new mindset that allows people to leave behind the previous way of thinking and operating, that change will remain an aspiration at best or an illusion at worst. That is why I firmly believe that capacity building is not just one more aspect of climate action, but rather the foundation of change. That change is urgently needed, and I believe is beyond question. Nowhere is this more evident than in the financial sector. The transition to a regenerative and circular economy, along with the proliferation of new low-emissions technologies, are the driving forces of the transformation we need to achieve. but they cannot advance at the speed and scale that is necessary without adequate financial support. Finance needs to be at the heart of international efforts to address climate change and of the new economic opportunities arising from our response to climate change. To succeed, this transformation needs to be supported with the right scale of finance, of the right kind, and at the right time, as recommended by the authors of the report on climate finance issued here in Dubai, and also of many, many other reports. The challenge for climate finance is to increase, at the speed and scale that the climate crisis demands, all types of investments to support the climate agenda, including energy transformation, adaptation and resilience to the adverse consequences of climate change, development of technology, and capacity building, all guided by the overriding principle of a just transition. As a high-level group of experts on climate finance has stressed, all these will remain academic unless countries establish a favorable investment environment that is based on strong and sustained policy and institutional reforms that unlock the scale and quality of investment needed, most of which will ultimately come from the private sector. And this is where capacity building in the private sector comes to the fore. Equipping people with the right skills, knowledge, and outlook will accelerate the implementation of climate strategies and ensure that financial decisions are in line with the overriding goals of the Paris Agreement. And let me say that I believe we need to pay specific attention to capacity building for women. Women are solution providers, and they should also have better capacities in order to make the contribution that they can make in the economy. Every financial institution needs to adjust their business models, develop credible plans for the transition to a low-carbon resilient future, and then implement them. The plans are good, but we need implementation. Plans are not, don't make any change unless they are implemented. So this profound change requires extensive, dedicated, and sustained capacity building efforts that changes the way financial decisions are made. Also, let me stress the fact that capacity building needs to be a continuous process. It is not a question of building capacities once and then everything is done. Our reality is evolving, so the capacities, the skills of the people that are driving that transformation need to be enhanced continuously. Because a net zero economy ultimately depends on net zero finance. At COP28, we look to national business and finance leaders to show how they will transform the financial system and align financial flows with climate change commitments, beginning with the ethos they instill in their workforce and the skills they foster among them. The new outlook must address at least three critical tasks. First, enhancing net zero awareness and commitment across the financial sector. Second, developing adequate financial regulation in support of net zero policies and practices. And third, aligning mobilization consistent with the net zero goal. Each of those critical tasks will require, in one way or another, capacity building in the finance sector. And this is why I believe the important initiative launched by Mark Carney and Mike Bloomberg, G-Funds, is really such an important contribution. And I am very honored to be able to contribute there with the new chairing the new chapter of G-Funds in Latin America and the Caribbean. I know Alex will probably speak about that, so I will leave it at that, and Alex, you can expand on that. So, dear friends, Climate action is, at its heart, an act of collective self-interest. We are not asking private financial institutions to turn themselves into philanthropic institutions, but to recognize that the well-being of all depends on addressing and ultimately overcoming the climate emergency that our previous economic model has created. Leaders in the public and private sectors across the world must not only support but push for a profound transformation of the financial system, making sure that its principles and practices are consistent with climate change commitments. We all know what is needed now is a commitment to go from billions to trillions with clear strategies that allow for a significant, swift and sustained mobilization of investments that can drive prosperity and fair development that is sustainable. This cannot happen without the commitment and support of private financial institutions across the world. Embracing this agenda and transforming their outlook through ambitious and enlightened capacity building is the best way for the private financial sector to build a future of hope for all. And it may well be our best hope for the future. Thank you very much. And wish you all success today in these conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Espinosa, for highlighting the importance of capacity building and how it's really the foundation that it needs to be looked at as the foundation, because without it, we cannot evolve climate finance in the way that we wish to, because obviously we need climate finance for climate action. And also the fact that this capacity building must be continuous, as you mentioned, because the climate crisis and climate change being sustainability goals, where our panelists will share the challenges, opportunities, and key lessons. Alex, head of the GFANZ Global Network, Louise Baker, Managing Director of the Global Mechanism at UNCCC, Gonzalo Munoz, co-founder of System 5, Carolina Fuentes, Director, Country Programming of the Green Climate Fund, and Darshan Wignaraja, Director, EU and UK Institute. Welcome to all of our panelists. And I will actually begin with Alex to ask you, because you have a very global perspective on the way financial institutions are really stepping up to this challenge of, climate-related risks and opportunities, identifying them and actually working to address them. So in your opinion, what are the main areas of opportunity to really enhance knowledge and capabilities and the capacity relating to climate action within the private sector?
Today, and thank you for your wonderful remarks, Ambassador. And Alok Sharma was a COP president in Glasgow. I was in the COP presidency team with Darshan, and they put emphasis on the need for finance to go beyond public finance and really bring private finance right into the heart of the COP negotiations, the COP event, and the solutions ultimately to climate change. There's lots of reports, Stern Songway, CPI do their own reports. There's lots of reports diagnosing the challenge / the opportunity, but it's probably in the order of magnitude of around, what would you say, 100 trillion, some people say. I think that's the number. Around 100 trillion of investment, which is a colossal amount needed in the next 30 years. That's just on mitigation, not on adaptation, which is crucial as well. So you can't get that level of investment without having private finance right at the heart of it. So we created GFANZ as part of the COP presidency with Mark Carney as the chair and since then Mike Bloomberg. And in order to be in GFANZ, you had to be in the Race to Zero, which my good friend Gonzalo Munez was running with Nigel Topping, which was about mobilizing sub-state actors, not just financial institutions, but universities, cities, corporates, with we mean business and science-based targets initiative. So the whole purpose of this was to get the financial system, the economy, the whole of society working together in advance of ultimately the Paris Agreement. So that year was about commitments. You had to make these commitments that were science-based, set targets for 2030 latest, 2025 preferably. Those targets had to be in line with 1.5 degrees. So it's actually very challenging. So that first year was about making that commitment, and then you had 12 months to implement them. We spent the next 12 months, and this is a really important point, in order to achieve commitments, whether it's about adaptation, mitigation, the amount of finance, decarbonisation, you need frameworks and tools for then implementing them. So we've been trying to work with, in a spirit of radical collaboration, scientists, financial institutions, regulators, policymakers and politicians, civil society organisations, all working together to create those frameworks and provide that global consistency and those tools needed in order to implement and take the action needed to achieve those commitments. So I would say that was a really important step, and I would say broadly that step is now complete. So Glasgow is about the commitments, building those tools and frameworks to implement them, are largely complete, and now it really needs to be fully about implementation. And one of the biggest challenges on implementation is capacity. So there are some, there are some financial institutions. You said HSBC is going to be here later today. They've got 200,000 employees. That makes it much more hard. It makes it harder if you've got acting for every country in the world, and you've got every business line, you've got credit, you've got private debt, you've got equity, you've got blah, blah, blah. But you also have a lot more staff. You have the ability to go out and hire expert consultants. But if you're, say, CIB, which is the largest bank in Egypt, so it's not small, your team that's responsible for doing this very difficult work is very small, and you have a smaller budget to go out and, we want to create a transition plan, we want to publish science-based targets. It's harder to do that without support. So one of the things we've been working on, and was really pleased that it was launched earlier this week at COP by Mike Bloomberg, and GCF were there as well, and others. So it's all of the MDBs, all of the relevant UN agencies, all of the relevant standards. So the Network for Greening the Financial System, the International Sustainability Standards Board, coming together and saying, okay, the current landscape of capacity building is actually quite fragmented, quite confusing. People aren't really sure how to access it. There's often overlapping programs by topic, by region, and then other regions don't have the in-person programs. So what we can do is better as a global community is work together to really offer if you're a financial institution in an emerging market or developing country and you want to do a transition plan, or you want to access the GCF, you want to access blended finance, but you don't really know how, have almost like a one-stop shop okay, there's no organization in the world at the moment that offers a soup to nuts. There's ones like GFANZ that does mitigation, there's others that do adaptations, there's others that do blended finance, there's others that do target setting. Can we just make a sense of that landscape and make it as easy as possible to access the resources? And then I will finish by saying we have found that peer-to-peer learning is actually the most effective. I'll give you an example of Japan, where we were trying for a long time to improve the adaptation and adoption of climate disclosures. And Japan had no uptake early on. I worked on the TCFD, Task Force, or Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Japan then opened the TCFD consortium in Japan, where it was Japanese teaching other Japanese corporates, so corporate to corporate, financial institution to financial institution. And today, Japan represents about 40% of all TCFD supporters in the world, by far the biggest. So what we found is like local staff reporting to local boards, doing peer-to-peer learning. So it's much more informative and inspirational, frankly, to see what your competitor or your peer is doing and how they're doing it and how they've overcome the challenges than it is to hear from someone like me who doesn't work in a pure financial institution doing it. So we think that's a really important process and a really important way of delivering capacity, and that's why we've set up these regional networks, and we've been really indebted to Gonzalo and Patricia in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Ravi Menon in Asia Pacific, and Mahmoud Mahildin, who's another champion in Africa. So they're my overarching kind of thoughts on how we're doing and how we can do better.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. And, you know, with the example you gave of peer-to-peer learning, that is really so crucial, because having someone talk down at you coming from a completely different industry with no idea about how you work, like that's not going to actually convince people to bring about any kind of change. So that's always really, really effective.
I think that's a really important point. And I just want to say peer-to-peer is important in terms of financial institutions, the financial institution, but also the level within. So we found CEO roundtables are really helpful, but also CSO roundtables or CIO roundtables, or even as you go down, because there's broad contours of what you need to do in your institution, depending on what seniority you are, and they're actually quite different. So what a CEO has to do the right thing is actually quite different from what someone further down in the organization has to do. So creating that peer-to-peer learning is really, really impactful as well.
Absolutely, and it ties in very well to one of the earlier points you made about what I was hearing was multi-stakeholder partnerships and really bringing everyone to the table. But for that to happen, people need to be aware, agreeing to work with one another, have trust and transparency, and that's where peer-to-peer learning does come in. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I'll now come to you, Louise. So, you know, there's really an urgent need to address biodiversity and desertification. And, you know, as someone who's worked at the grassroots for a really long time, it's really obvious that you can't always put a price on nature. So you can't always see the levels of biodiversity loss and desertification reflected in financial books and, like, you know, in accounting statements. So, you know, how would you like to see financial institutions within the private sector responding to all of these environmental challenges, and what do you think needs to be done to achieve this? Over to you.
Thank you. Small question then. Hi everybody, I'm Louise Baker, I'm the Managing Director of the Global Mechanism at UNCCD, and we're really focusing on sort of the nature-based issues, and it's actually even more challenging, I think, than the kind of energy space and the bit where the business case is quite clear and the financial industry gets it. I think the first thing that we needed to do, and I think we're sort of getting there now, is to make that business case. From a very practical perspective, we helped establish an impact investment fund. So I don't see anybody from Morova here, so I'm going to talk on their behalf because they're not here. Love when I get to do that. But they, it was a relatively small fund, I guess, 350 million, but really going through the process of making degraded land an asset class. So understanding from the private sector that there can be a return on investment there, that closing that productivity gap, that yield gap, would actually lead to a financial benefit. Step one. Step two, I think, was then them going, but most of your degraded land is in horrible places that are really risky. So then working through the sort of de-risking process so that the private sector felt comfortable that their investment wouldn't be lost in the first week, that sort of thing. And then I think that we've had quite some challenges with the public sector. Because in our space, at least, and I think that's not true in all spaces, but the understanding that the money's not coming to them. whenever we're trying to convince the financial industry and the private sector to be investing in the climate space, they're very cautious and they're very nervous because they feel that there's going to be some form of government interference. It sounds like a policy issue and somebody's going to come and take the money. So I think kind of making them comfortable in the sense that we're looking for the green transformation and a green economy, not a kind of surreptitious tax, also it makes them definitely more comfortable. So that, I think, from the practical perspective is the direction that we've gone. Going forward, I think we continue to send the wrong market signals in nature. So I would, things like subsidies, taxes, incentives are not encouraging either production or the financial industry to shift, and I think needs to work. And one of the incentives that I think we're currently working on that I think is quite an interesting one is working with the insurance industry. Slightly different approach. But at the moment, for example, drought insurance, we insure largely, it's not everywhere, but largely insurance for drought is on the basis of when it doesn't rain, which makes sense, right? But we're not rewarding good practice. In the way, if you have insurance for your, if you have your insurance for your home, if you've got a security camera or you've got the right lock on the door, or if you have medical insurance and you go for a run every week, or if you have car insurance and you drive well, you're incentivized for doing that. But actually in our climate insurance space, what we're doing is we're insuring against the hazard. We're not rewarding the best practice. And in our space, for example, if farmers sustainably manage the land, their drought risk and flood risk would be reduced. So I think it's really understanding that it isn't a space where you have to reinvent the wheel every time, but all of these models, they need a tweak. Actually, there's a great quote by Adam Smith who said, all money is a matter of belief. And I think, that we need to believe that this is we need to ensure that the financial industry, we need to ensure that the private sector understand that green money is still money. And it's a matter of belief and to shift them on that way. I'll stop talking.
Thank you very much. And I love that, green money is still money. And as you mentioned, that a lot of the time you see the signaling isn't the greatest, and it's really not encouraging to the private sector to come in and understand that they're a very important part of this whole moving towards sustainability and towards a more climate smart future. And just, as you mentioned, there's the understanding that there are ROIs when they invest in nature, and that's really crucial to understand as well.
Yeah, and one of the things, just to sort of, whilst I'm venting, one of the challenges we have is about the project development. A lot of the work that we do is stacking a pipeline of bankable projects. We can just about, in this nature space, get the projects over the line for people who are very climate friendly. But the bankability for the private sector, particularly for investment for projects with a strong government component, is almost impossible. So I put that on the table as well for capacity development. We really need to look at the ability to design those bankable projects and bankable investments.
Absolutely, for sure. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think, again, it's a wonderful way to go to our next panelist, Gonzalo. So you've been a key figure in the global efforts in favor of climate finance for a really, really long time. So really, looking at it from that perspective, as well as someone who has really in-depth knowledge of Latin America and the Caribbean, where do you think are the greatest needs for capacity building within private financial institutions, particularly in relation to climate change and sustainability? And do you think these are being acknowledged within the institutions, or do you really feel that we're kind of still in the business as usual phase? So, and if we are, and if you do say that's the case, what do you think needs to change?
Well, thanks so much, Hashan, and thanks to the organizers, especially to 1.5, for inviting us to this crucial conversation. As Alex just mentioned, I've been proudly involved in the development of GFANs in Latin America and the Caribbean, and I'm proud to be part of Patricia and Alan's team on supporting the growth of this network in the region, and using the experience of how the region is, but mostly also taking a look on how this has evolved. I definitely see quite clear messages and signals. It has evolved positively in terms of awareness, so you can see that many more people, and even people that not that long ago were doubting and perceiving that it was like smart to be a denier of climate change or whatever, like they feel embarrassed of have that position. So we see a change that is very positive, but definitely still not enough. So the combination of factors is quite interesting. I'm totally aligned with what Luis says in terms of how hard it is to get projects to be bankable. It's really hard to de-risk many of the solutions that we're absolutely clear that is necessary, but as a community we're watching like, well, someone's going to solve it, right? And the government doesn't know how to solve it, they don't have the money, they don't have capacity, private sector says, well, as long as this is that level of risk, we won't take the decision. So of course there's a combination of factors that means that someone has to take the bulls from the horns. That's we say that in Spanish as well. Well, so someone has to do that, and of course we require much more leadership and courage from different sectors. I see that there is a very fundamental role for development banks, right? And I love the idea of reframing that because they're operating in the 19th century in terms of what they're trying to develop. Great, they did a great job. Most of those challenges are still very relevant, but if they don't play their new role on de-risking most of the needs that we have, most of those $1 trillion that Alex was mentioning, well, we will fail and we'll get to a point where we say, oh, it would have been great if they would have played that role, right? On the other side, we have the reality that even when it comes to institutions from the private sector saying, yeah, this is super important. Now I got quite connected to the topic from the head of the organization, then that's most of the time not enough, because either they fail on just saying to the organization, whether it's a bank or a pension fund or a investment organization, they might say, yeah, just generate an ESG area, or let's work on CSR or sustainability, and they put it aside. The failure comes to the role of the analyst. So the analyst will say, like, I don't get paid for this. Yeah, I might understand it, but no one is really paying me on a monthly basis for doing this work. And honestly, I don't know. So unless we have a taxonomy that is as clear as every analyst will understand it and get paid for it, we will keep on saying that this is beautiful and romantic ideas of things that we want to do that are not being meaningful for the financial institutions that need to implement. We're seeing, of course, best case scenarios when not only the head of the organization, whether the owner, the president, the CEO understand it, but we have a board that has metrics that are really considering this topic into their KPIs that they are analyzing hopefully every month, that they have a council meeting in relation to this, that that is also spread all around the organization, including, of course, the ones that are doing the business, the commercial area, that they understand that they can use money that in the past was mostly used for marketing and communications to really deploy into projects, right, to help that understanding. And at the end, you can see analysts like suffering for it. In terms of they realize that, holy, now I have to do something different, and I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't trained for this. So we have to first start by training the head, but going all the way into the organization, up to the analyst, creating also the conditions for that institution to help the government. So we also have a massive problem when the answer most of the time is, I'm not going to do it, even though I understand it. Many times also my board is telling me that I'm going to do it, but honestly, I'm not going to do it until this is regulated. Why should I? So we still see many, unfortunately, the majority of the organization hiding themselves behind the fiduciary duty. It's like, if I'm not really forced to do this, if this is not a matter of real legal materiality for the organization, why should I? Or I perceive a risk, even though I think that I would love to. Please force me to do it. But when I do it on a voluntary basis, I'm running a risk, right? So that combination is flowing. So we have great cases on banks in the region, from banks, all of them, of course, members of Race to Zero, members of GFANs and Race to Zero, of course, like Bancolombia, doing an amazing work. Banorte, you have the cases of BCI and Banco de Estado in Chile. You can see the work that now Itaú is developing. It's mostly because of the courage and the determination of the head of the organization, and they're struggling. They're struggling internally to bring that into the commercial concrete cases, and they're struggling to be exposed to the general community and to the regulations in terms of, I can potentially be accused of doing something that was wrong, whereas I know that I'm doing the right thing. On the other case, let me share just one very concrete case that I thought it was beautiful. Also a GFANS member, a investment fund working in several countries in Latin America. In this case, the founders of the fund said, yes, we're going to open a fund, that it was traditional, and we will convert that into the best case of a climate investment. And they're like all around, from health to automotive to building to service providers in different sectors. So it's not that they're investing in solar power or greening the desert, right? It's like they're super conservative in what they invested, and they said, let's try to turn that into a world-class investment on climate. That has been beautiful. So 3 years we've been working with them. They asked me to be in all of their boards. So I'm in the board of 9 companies that I invested in. And it's like they own always more than 60% of the company. So they have the capacity of really changing the rules. And they went from the first day to knock the door of the CEO and say, I'm sorry, rules have changed. You have to give us the same level of return. And now this is a new rule. We will measure every single aspect of ESG. We will use the ESG the SDG work, but the SDG tool from B Lab, from the B Corps. We're not going to tell you that you have to convert into a B Corp, but it would be great if you do so. But we will measure every single aspect. And what happened then immediately, all of them started measuring their impact, and every single company, it's the beauty of this, they were free to choose what are the SDGs that are mostly important and more material for a company. As I said, like from dental to automotive to building, all of them at least had climate and gender, like the 2 ones that are in every single company. And I would say in between 1 year to 2 years, they were really top on scoring in those 2 aspects, because they have a owner, in this case, this investor, that is saying, I'm going to now measure your success and pay your salary and of the whole team if you perform well on the SDGs that you ask for. I mean, you decide, and in this case, it's climate and gender. It's a fantastic case of how the transformation of portfolio of traditional company came from an investor that believed that this is something that needs to be done and requires a cultural shift coming from the head, but embedding the whole of the organization, all the KPIs, and now they are performing even better in some cases in terms of profitability, but also performing marvelously when it comes to at least those 2 topics.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so glad you actually shared a success story, because very often, people look at the sector and they're like, well, who has taken that first step? As you mentioned, people aren't willing to take that first step. So.
Sorry, I think that made a huge mistake by not naming them, right? It's Linsor. That's the name of the investor fund, a member of GFANS. They're fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's really great to know about it, because people look at the sector and they're like, who took that first step? We need to see someone who took that first step. It's not going to be me, as you mentioned. We're waiting for someone else to save the planet, and success stories like that prove that it is possible to really move forward in this regard and have successful partnerships and investments in this area. So thank you very much for sharing that. Carolina, coming to you. The Green Climate Fund, you really have a lot of knowledge and expertise on climate finance. So could you speak a bit about like what role it plays in enhancing the capacities of the private sector in relation to the climate agenda? And in your opinion, what are the 3 most influential actions that the Green Climate Fund can take to contribute to this really important task?
Many thanks, and very, very honored to be in this event. I would like to also acknowledge and appreciate 1.5 for the invitation, and also the organizers for having us here, joining this distinguished panel. And now when it comes to the role of the GCF from its very establishment back in 2010 under the leadership of Ambassador Espinosa, is intended as well and has the mandate to mobilize public and private sources of finance, given the fact that we need the trillions, as mentioned as well from the very beginning, not only the billions, to make sure that we promote the change that is needed to address climate change. So the GCF is intended to mobilize public, private, and alternate sources of finance. As part of that, we need to remove barriers to private investments and also raise the level of awareness on the positive benefits as well of climate action for all sectors of society, including the private sector. When it comes to specific actions about how GCF promotes engagement of the private sector, I would like to point three very concrete initiatives that we have in place. The Readiness Program is the largest capacity building program for climate action globally. At present, and now the strategic request of capacity building. These strategic requests are intended also to incorporate actions from the private sector, because we're a country-driven organization, and the whole of society at the country level needs to be mobilized to identify capacity support. So this for recycle and be mobilized, including for actions. Building is the foundation for change, and is the foundation as well for that net zero economy, and the foundation to make sure that the countries have the capacities that they need to. Another important action that I would like to mention is the role that GCF plays as a convener. We have a network of more than 2,000, 200 partners, accredited entities, and Alex mentioned for GFANS as well, the change when it comes to financial sectors at the local level. Out of our network of partners, we have 30 of them are private sector, and 19 of them are direct regions at the local level. So working with them is also another important initiative for us, because that is a way in which we can mobilize a local action, including at the private sector level. Last but not least as well, we have a large portfolio of investments in the private sector. We have 243 projects in total. That in terms of funding value is 30 sector projects in our portfolio that are benefiting as well different sectors in developing countries, and are also a demonstration that private sector action is also an investment, and it's an investment that has positive externalities that need to be internalized as we plan for climate and as we plan for development. So the GCF is there to support, and we have different ways of supporting when it comes to capacity building, engagement of stakeholders, and very concrete climate investments.
Actually, thank you very much for sharing that really important work. And also, I think it also highlights the importance of multi-stakeholder actions in that regard. And I love how you focused on the local solutions as well, because very often this can be seen as a top-down process, and obviously that's really not true. So engaging all communities, particularly local communities that are most impacted by climate change, is crucial. So thank you very much for highlighting that. And that brings us to Darshan. So CPI has carried out extensive analysis on finance and policy, and it's acknowledged as this authoritative source for advice for governments and businesses and financial institutions. So obviously, climate finance agenda, this is something that needs a lot of advancing, but it's really not at that level of the speed and scale that it needs to be. It's something that Ambassador Espinosa mentioned during her keynote as well. So what would you say are the three most important and immediate tasks to drive climate capacity building within the private financial sector, and what do you think are the key milestones that need to be achieved? So really, what would you like to see, new or enhanced capabilities within climate finance within the private sector in the short term as well as in the long term?
Kirsten, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to 1.5 and Ambassador Espinosa, and it's a real delight to listen to the rest of the panel. I mean, I would start by just highlighting, what variety there is in terms of capacity building. I mean, we've heard from GFANs, we've heard from Gonzalo, we've heard from a range of different perspectives, both international and regional. And I think it gives you a flavor of the distinction that matters for what does this mean at a local level versus what does this mean at regional or global level. So to answer your question, let me try and give you three areas which, in my new role in a non-profit, I think we have the opportunity to kind of stand back from it a bit and say, look, this is what we see from our vantage point. Firstly, I would say it is mission critical for us in the next 3 years to continue to make progress on the definition and clarity around what constitutes transition finance. This remains a very thorny, very complex problem. And I think particularly for private finance institutions, there is a lot of capacity building that can be done around the topic of what does transition finance mean in different contexts, in different sectors, and in different regional spheres. I think that's important because, as you heard earlier on the panel, as you think through capacity building, Alex mentioned the different levels that you can talk to in a financial institution, be that from the top all the way to the investment executives and the investment officers. When I'm talking about clarity around guidance for transition finance, what I specifically mean is the ability for investment officers and ultimately chief investment officers to make informed decisions about, is my portfolio currently aligned to those who have science-based targets and are making progress, or is it more exposed than it should be to those who have not made those commitments? That is at the heart of what progress are we making. So I would frame that as the first and critical task upon which I think we need to make more progress. The second task I would outline is, and it's close to climate policy initiatives' heart, right? We do a lot of data analysis and review of the transparent information, to the extent that it exists, that is flowing from financial institutions. I am anxious, if I'm honest, that the initial steps that we've seen in areas like transition pathway mandation are not yet being fulfilled. And I think in the next 3 years, we really need to see the major economies, led by the G7 and the G20, mandating transition pathways amongst their core financial institutions. And obviously you start in some senses with the biggest institutions, and then it percolates down through the system. But I think that is an imperative for finance ministries to provide direction on, so that private financial institutions all over the world have clarity on this is what we now need to be compelled to do. To Gonzalo's point, if you do not have a regulatory imperative, there is only a certain pace that you can move at based on voluntary disclosure. And that, I think, is a core concern. And if you want something that we need to focus on in the next 3 years, that would be the second. And then the third thing I would mention is, and I think Alex again said, radical collaboration, right? And we're hearing that word, that phrase quite a lot in COP28. I hope it means something, right? My career has been private sector, public sector. I've worked a lot with the MDBs. It's the rhetoric around getting MDBs, the wider public development bank community, to work closely with private financial institutions has been good for a long time. The reality of it has lagged. So what I think specifically is if you look at the private sector engagement lab that the World Bank has recently constituted, what I'd like to see within 3 years is quite a long time, but I feel that we should be pushing the bank and the other key development finance institutions to work very closely with the likes of the GFANZ coalition to very clearly articulate what does that work plan look like over the coming 18, 24, 36 months. Break it down year by year increments. What types of capital structures are we going to trial and test that we haven't done recently? And that can build off things that the GCF are doing and you know, various other providers of concessional capital can play into that equation. So I think that's mission critical. And just a last point on what we can do collectively. I really like the progress that Gonzalo was highlighting. The firm that you mentioned, Linzo. I think in 3 years' time, and this actually is almost a request to Alex and those involved in GFANZ, I sit on the advisory panel, so also it's a note to self. I think it's really useful if GFANZ moves to a space where we are clarifying who are the top 20, who are the top 50, who are the top 100 by investor category in different, and say, this is next generation. This is what the
but innovation as well, and you'll be able to see, like, once that's out there and people are seeing these success stories, there's more and more solutions that are suddenly coming up because people, as you mentioned, are seeing role models. So thank you very much for sharing that with us, and thank you to all of our panelists today for sharing your insights on this very, very crucial topic, because we are at a point in time when we can't ignore climate finance. We know that any sort of climate action requires finance, and for that to happen, our financial institutions, our private financial institutions, need to be a part of the solution because they do not exist in a silo. They exist on this planet and are run by people, and all of these